possible. Again, we'll get started here in just at 12:15. We're getting more folks trickling in, so thanks for stopping by the Global Rangelands Tour. Our first stop today is Mexico, and we will be getting started in just 2 more minutes. Give more people the opportunity to come in. Also remember that we are streaming live, so go ahead and share it with folks that you might think might be interested in bird conservation on ranches in Mexico and llamas. We have llamas coming at the end of the presentation. Everyone loves llamas, so share the link for the live stream with everyone that you know, because it is free to watch the Global Range Tours on the SRM Facebook page and the SRM YouTube channel. Again, we'll get started here in just a minute or two. Okay, well, I have 12:15 on my clock, so I think we can get started with this second stop of our Global Rangelands Tour. I appreciate everyone joining us over your lunch hour. We're going to stay in the Western Hemisphere today with our first stop in the Chihuahuan Grasslands of Mexico. We're going to start with a brief video from the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and then we will hear from Arvind Punjabi, who is with the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and is involved in this project. So with that, I am going to share my screen right now and ensure that I'm sharing my audio with you as well. And we will go right to this video that is on YouTube.
Es muy
This is streaming fine, so somebody just let me know if it's not.
Yo me dedico a la ganadería. Yo no trabajo, yo disfruto vivir aquí. Para mí no es venir a trabajar. Y no me canso, o sea, puedo estar aquí todo el tiempo y estoy más feliz aquí que afuera. Cuando comencé a trabajar aquí, pues había muy poco zacate y había mucho menos ganado. Me di cuenta que estaba destrozando un ecosistema. De seguir así, íbamos a terminar vendiendo el rancho o quebrados. Fue cuando tocamos fondo.
¿Por qué tenemos menos ganado del que teníamos? ¿Por qué no somos tan rentables como éramos antes? Porque antes explotamos el recurso natural, bien, pero de forma no sustentable. Yo creo que la única forma de ser más rentable es con un manejo sustentable de los pastizales. En realidad, la venta de las vacas es una forma de vender tu pasto.
Yo no vivo de las vacas, vivo de la producción del zacate que lo hacemos a través de la tierra. Si no es la productividad del pastizal, del ecosistema.
El pastizal es la parte más importante porque si no hay pastizal, pues las vacas no sirven. El fundamento es no sobrepastorear.
¿Por qué? Porque cuando llueve, no llueve zacate. Y a mucha gente se le olvida eso. En un terreno maltratado, en un terreno lacerado, en un terreno acabado, no va a salir el zacate el día que llueva.
El rancho es una empresa que se maneja el todo. O sea, aquí incluye pájaros, incluye las víboras, incluye todos los microorganismos que están en el suelo, el zacate y las vacas. Tenemos que manejar todo junto para poderlo sacar adelante. Todos los animales que están naturalmente aquí son indicadores de un buen pastizal.
El halcón aplomado hace 20 años para mí viene representando algo como un termómetro de la condición en la que se mantiene el terreno. Yo creo que es un signo muy representativo de que estamos haciendo las cosas de alguna forma bien.
A mayor variedad de tu fauna, más sano está tu rancho, tu ecosistema. Quiere decir que estás haciendo bien las cosas.
Uno de los retos más grandes es cambiar la forma de pensar, o sea, los paradigmas con que crecimos de cómo se debería hacer la ganadería. Y si no cambia uno de actitud hacia la naturaleza y la seguimos viendo como la estamos viendo, en lugar de verla toda junta, no podemos cambiar. O sea, primero tenemos que cambiar nosotros para poder manejar el ecosistema.
De un inicio dijimos, bueno, vamos a ver cómo le podemos hacer de una forma sustentable. Primeramente, el ganado estaba esparcido por todo el rancho.
Comenzamos a agrupar el ganado, comenzamos a cambiarlo, a rotarlo y darle mucho más tiempo de descanso al pastizal para que pudiera estar sano, para que pudiera ser sustentable.
No es en realidad el número de animales que tengas en una parte lo que hace daño al potrero. Es el tiempo que pasan esos animales en el potrero. A menor tiempo, más eficiente.
Si alguien se interesa en el sistema que nosotros tenemos de pastoreo, sería eso. No sobrepastorear, no acabar con los terrenos.
Hay que entender que va evolucionando el tiempo y hay otras maneras más fáciles de hacer las cosas. Entonces ahora hay que irnos con lo nuevo. No está yendo bien. Los números son los que hablan, no puede decir uno, pues los números no mienten.
La cubierta de nuestro rancho se ha incrementado de un 60 a un 80% del zacate que teníamos antes. Ahora, lo sano que se ve el zacate, y definitivamente hemos parado la desertificación, el deterioro de la tierra. Una vez que entiende uno la forma de hacerlo y que ve los resultados, vale la pena. Es una satisfacción.
Qué costoso es no saber. Es muy costoso no saber cómo trabajar la naturaleza. La gente prefiere fracasar de forma convencional que tener éxito de forma no convencional.
No le estamos diciendo con palabras, con hechos lo que estamos haciendo, ¿verdad? No es, ahí es donde vas a hacer cambiar a la gente. Con palabras, pues no, batalla. Pero sí cambia, porque cambié yo.
Tú vas y te ves en el espejo y ese es el único responsable de todo lo que pasa en los ranchos. Es muy difícil, en realidad, reconocer eso. Pero no hay más. Mientras no reconozcamos que nosotros somos los responsables de lo que pasa, no podemos hacer esa crítica autoconstructiva y decir, ok, vámonos por acá.
Si pudiera decirlo, yo cada vez que me subo en un caballo y pongo mis pies en los estribos, me siento el rey de la montaña. Que el convivir con la naturaleza le da a uno vida. Y eso es lo que yo siento.
Es una satisfacción para un ser humano volver a vivir y a sentir la naturaleza como es. Es una satisfacción pues muy grande.
Okay, well, I think that's a great video. And sitting in Montana in February, it's great to see some green bootaloo and flowers. But we have with us Arvind Punjabi from the Bird Conservancy, who has worked on this project. And so, Arvind, I invite you to share your screen and have your presentation now. And everyone, after this 15 minutes or so, we'll have some question and answer. So pop anything you want to talk about in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll bring it up later. And with that, Arvind, thanks a lot for being here. If you can introduce yourself and take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Devin. And thanks for showing that video. I still get chills when I watch that. Maybe it's just because I know those places.
Oh, we can't hear you, Arvind, right now.
Oh, huh. I seem to be off mute. Not coming through?
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I just
good.
can't, sorry.
Wonder why that is. Well, glad that all the folks in the audience can hear anyways. Yeah, I'm a senior research scientist at the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, based in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the video you just saw is about some of the ranchers who I work with in northern Mexico to try to conserve the grasslands in this region, which are critically important for migratory birds, especially those from the Great Plains. And before I get started on my presentation, which will follow up on that video, I'd like to just recognize my co-authors in the presentation and also in this work. They are essential collaborators for getting this work done. And that's Allison Shaw, who works with me here at the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, as well as Nancy Hernandez and Roberto Rodriguez, who work with the nonprofit organization IMC Vida Silvestre in Chihuahua, Mexico, as well as our collaborator, Dr. Irene Rubalcaba from the University of Nuevo León in Monterrey, Mexico. And so today I'll be talking about our program called the Sustainable Grazing Network. Let me just get onto advancing the slides here. It seems like the first one I need to be able to see my other screen. So hopefully y'all are seeing a slide now about Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are before we get started. We are a nonprofit organization. Still me.
We're not seeing the slide. We're still seeing you.
Thank you for that heads up. Let me switch presenter screens. I should be able to do that. Let's see. Oh, I need to share my screen, of course. Yeah. Okay, now hopefully you are seeing
We are.
full screen.
Yep. Great.
Great. Well, yeah, I'll just start by telling you a little bit about the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. We're a nonprofit organization based in Colorado, but we operate throughout the Western United States, as well as in Mexico and Central America. And our mission is and has always been to conserve birds and their habitats through an integrated approach of science, education, and land stewardship. We envision a future where birds are forever abundant, contributing to healthy landscapes and inspiring human curiosity and love of nature. As I mentioned, we work primarily through these three avenues: science, stewardship, and education. And our goal is connecting people, birds, and land, so that people understand the resources that they have on their land and can help protect those and manage those so that they remain for future generations. So I mentioned talking about the Sustainable Grazing Network. This is a program we began about 8 years ago in northern Mexico. And it began after several years of some bird research and monitoring in the region, which was aimed at identifying important habitats and regions for grassland birds. We really didn't know too specifically where individual species of birds wintered within the Chihuahuan Desert region, and even where those important grasslands were. So this was back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. But since then, we have learned a lot, and we also know that 90% of the migratory bird species from the Great Plains winter in this region, the Chihuahuan Desert region, and some of them winter there exclusively. There is limited habitat in this region, as you can see on the map on the right. It's about a 5-to-1 ratio of grasslands from the breeding areas from New Mexico and northern Texas north, compared to the wintering areas in the Chihuahuan Desert region. And although the current GIS suggests that about 15% of the Chihuahuan Desert region is grassland, from our own on-the-ground work confirming and visiting some of these grassland sites, we have refined that estimate to somewhere around 5% of the region is actually what we would consider grasslands. Much of the rest of it has been transformed either into agriculture or into shrub-dominated landscapes. The birds that come here spend the majority of the year here, actually up to 8 months a year. So this is a globally important region. But unfortunately, the grasslands in this region are facing high threats, and as a result may be contributing to the long-term population declines that we are seeing in grassland bird populations. This graphic on the bottom right here shows the trends over the last 50 years roughly for grassland birds that winter in the Chihuahuan Desert versus North American grassland birds that winter elsewhere. And you can see the ones that winter in the Chihuahuan Desert have suffered almost twice as much of a decline as those other grassland birds, which have also still declined by about 35%. But those birds that winter in the Chihuahuan Desert have declined by as much as 70% on average across species. There's definitely something unique about this interconnected geography that is contributing to exceptionally high population declines. And some of the factors that might explain this are the long-term shrub encroachment and resulting desertification that's been going on here for many decades, but it's still ongoing today. And more recently, the rapid expansion of croplands through the expansion of the electric grid and allowing farmers to be able to pump groundwater in the Chihuahuan Desert. More frequent drought, and as you all are probably well familiar, these are important changes not just for the health of rangelands and their suitability for livestock production, but also for the grassland birds and other wildlife that depend on these systems. Finally, in this region, one more challenge is that there's relatively little conservation capacity, both money going towards conservation work, institutional conservation capacity, for example, range extension agents simply don't really exist in this area, other than from private consultants and some nonprofits like our own. But there's also relatively few organizations, conservation organizations, working in this region, just a small handful. And so those present some additional challenges for moving forward and meeting the challenge from the rapid changes in the landscape that we're seeing. So to address that rapid change and with limited resources, we developed a sustainable grazing network in 2012. And our vision was to create a voluntary network of collaboratively managed grazing lands that support populations and habitat needs of our priority grassland birds through a science-based working lands and adaptive management approach. Our goals are primarily twofold: to keep ranchers and stewards on the land. This is very important because, again, with limited conservation capacity, there's nobody else to take care of these areas. And so we want to support ranchers to improve their operations so that they can be profitable and sustainable both for them and the ecosystem. Secondly, our goal is to improve the carrying capacity of these ranch lands for grassland birds. And so we do this work primarily by addressing the drivers of habitat degradation and loss from a bird conservation perspective, but this means working with people on resolving grazing mismanagement, perhaps, or improving management. Many of these ranches that we work with have been passed down through the generations, and over that time, climate has changed, the quality of the land has changed, and it's clear that in some cases, new management paradigms are needed. One of the other facets of our work is that with each rancher we work with, we sign a 15-year management agreement to work collaboratively together on the goals of that we share in common. And this also includes a protection clause to not convert the land during this time period, and so provides some short-term protection, but also lays the groundwork for long-term protection, although our preference, of course, is to have long-term stewards and owners of the land. And so much of our work is focused on grazing management, land management, and restoration, but we also have a heavy monitoring component, monitoring both birds and vegetations, and I'll get into these in a few minutes, but we believe this is a win-win for both ranchers and birds. The Sustainable Grazing Network currently involves 28 ranches encompassing roughly 504,000 acres in 4 grassland priority areas in 3 Mexican states. And 21 of these ranches are what we consider co-managed ranches, where we develop a management plan together with the landowner and work on implementing that over the years. And 7 of these ranches are what we consider reference ranches. These are the ranches, like some of the ones you saw in the video, that are already doing excellent range management and really are the leaders who we try to follow. And we also collect data both on our co-managed ranches and these reference ranches to compare how things are going in terms of birds and vegetation conditions, to see if we see the same patterns both on these areas we're trying to improve and the ones that are essentially mimic our goal for these other ranches. The 4 grassland priority areas, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term GPCA, that comes from the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, their lexicon of terminology, but they, together with many partners from Canada and Mexico, developed a network of these grassland priority conservation areas. There are 17 of them in the Chihuahuan Desert, and our work currently spans 4 of these, primarily in northern Chihuahua, also in northeastern Sonora, in the New Mexico Boot Heel region that extends there, as well as the Via Columbia area in northern Coahuila. So the basis for our operations and the program is the development of the ranch management plans. This is a whole ranch management plan, including both a grazing plan, restoration plan, and that addresses bird habitat needs as well as an economic plan. We rely primarily on planned grazing, which generally involves rest rotation, though we generally don't promote a specific style of grazing. We work with the landowner to develop something that works for them, and then implement the monitoring as well so that we can provide feedback. A large component of the work also involves grassland restoration, like this project you see in the bottom right photo here of a key line plowing operation trying to recover water infiltration in barren hardpan areas and recover vegetation growth there. We also focus quite a bit on shrub control, but we also do some simple habitat improvements that really can make a difference for birds, but are easy to implement and also help to engage the landowners in sort of understanding what we're doing and what our goals are for helping some of the birds. Of course, we provide technical assistance both in the development of the plans and in implementing them, as well as cost share assistance in implementing the plans and some of the projects that need to be undertaken. And we also, of course, use the So as mentioned, of the 28 ranches currently in the network, 21 of which are those co-managed ranches, we've completed 17 ranch management plans. We have a few more underway. We've treated roughly 1,500 acres through keyline plowing. These are barren areas, trying to recover that vegetation. We've done some work with gabions to reduce erosion in gullies, and have treated close to 5,000 acres with shrub control, primarily targeting areas that are within 5 to 10% shrub cover and bringing those back down closer to 0 or 1%. We've, of course, cross fencing is a big part of what we do. The pastures in Mexico in general tend to be much larger than what we see in the US and probably elsewhere in the world as well. Well, some places anyways. But it's not uncommon for some of these ranches that we've worked with to have pastures that are 5 to 10,000 acres in size, which makes it hard to effectively utilize or control grazing across such a large area. Solar water pumps, we've installed a few of these to facilitate water distribution. Of course, water is a big part of facilitating planned grazing and being able to make use of all the pasture lands on the ranch and also allow rest in those critical, most productive grasslands. So 60 kilometers of buried water distribution lines going out to water storage tanks and stock tanks, as well as mobile livestock and wildlife watering troughs that can be moved around pastures. And again, different ranchers take different approaches. Some prefer to have fixed water features. Others prefer to move these around the landscape and use those to, again, encourage grazing and to utilize the available forage. Some of the simple conservation solutions that I mentioned earlier, one of these has been installing protective nest cribs for the aplomado falcon. This is a highly endangered bird species in the Chihuahuan Desert. We estimate there are less than 15 remaining pairs. Several of these pairs are now on these ranches that we work with, and we've been installing these protective nest cribs to improve their reproductive success. They exclude predators like ravens and great horned owls from easily entering the nest, particularly great horned owls. And we found that the nest success of falcons using these platforms tends to be around 90%, compared to between 30 to 60% in natural nests, which do not have the cover to exclude predators, of course. Another common practice that we do is install these stock tank ladders, although really they are designed for storage tanks, which can be around 2 meters deep. These are large uncovered storage tanks that are used to distribute water around the ranch, and unfortunately are frequently a site of accidental bird drownings. And our colleagues at IMC and University of Nuevo Leon installed some cameras on some of these stock tank ladders so we could see how the birds were actually using them. And interestingly, it turns out they don't use them to escape from the water once they've fallen in. They simply use them to safely access the water. So we've seen near 100% improvement in survival of birds in these stock tanks, no deaths anymore. The other practice that we do, a very simple practice, is to cap open pipes, which of course you can find all over on ranches, on fence posts, metal gate posts in particular, tend to be hollow open pipes. And until recently, it really wasn't known that many birds will enter these open pipes and get trapped inside. And it's a very simple solution to cap them. You can either just put like a large rock inside the opening to keep it anything from entering there, or fill the opening with some sort of material, again, prevent any birds from entering there. Just to give you an example of about the sort of the pace of the work, and to show you some pictures of some before and afters, which I hope you'll enjoy. We're still working on tallying up our total impact from 2020, so I've included 2019 here. We did range improvements that impacted close to 50,000 acres of rangelands, including about 20,000 acres of grasslands. Of course, many of the pastures include both shrublands and grasslands. And we conducted about 1,300 acres of grassland restoration, including shrub control on 375 acres and keyline plowing on 921 acres. This was a particularly good year for us in both those areas. We usually aren't able to do quite that much. And you can see the response can sometimes be quite dramatic and rapid. So here to the right, you see above a site in March, just before it was treated. And then later in the year, same year, by October, many of the shrubs are gone. We had cleared them out, and the grass growth was recovering nicely underneath. I'll show you a couple more of these pictures because I enjoy looking at them. So here's another shrub control site on a ranch in central Chihuahua. And here you can see the shrubs, pretty pervasive, doesn't really look much like a grassland at all. And even the forage quality doesn't look very good for cattle. So we took out the majority of shrubs from this site using backhoes and grubbers. And so this is immediately following the restoration treatment in 2015. And then 3 years later, we see that the grass cover is now dominating the landscape. relatively few shrubs. This is much better rangeland for cattle and much better habitat for those declining grassland birds like Sprague's pipits and chestnut-collared longspurs. Here's another practice. I mentioned the keyline plowing, again, targeting areas with very little vegetation growth and hard pan soils where the water tends to simply run off rather than penetrate. So we break up the surface. In northern Chihuahua. And I forgot to mention, we do work with both private ranchers as well as ejidos. Ejidos are the communal form of land management in Mexico. And again, 1 year later, a tremendous response. I'd like to talk a little bit about the vegetation monitoring and bird monitoring that we do on these ranches. Our last completed field season of monitoring was in 2019 and 2020. We conducted a total of 620 500-meter transects across these ranches, 27 of them, and used distance sampling to sample bird populations and conducted ocular vegetation surveys at 3 5-meter radius plots on each transect. The photo on the right here is a map of a ranch, and you can see the individual transects. And these are stratified by 3 different grassland types on the ranch: native mixed grasslands, halophytic grasslands, and then the hillier foothill grasslands. We are currently working on a redesign of our monitoring that'll switch from these individual transects to 1 kilometer grids, and that's underway, a pilot season to do that right now. And these graphs down here from the right are a little bit depressing, but I wanted to share them anyways because we have been in a drought in Chihuahua for the last 3 years. And so you see many of the vegetation trends are pointing downward, which is not a good sign. But the good thing is that we at least have the data here now to bring to the landowners to talk to them about what we can do to try to turn these around. So fortunately, the veg trends are not looking very good right now, but we hope that'll turn around once this drought lifts. But surprisingly, the bird monitoring trends are not quite as dire. And in fact, most of the birds seem to be hanging on quite well on these ranches, perhaps even improving. So here you can see density estimates of 3 species going back to 2014. Under the 2 classes of ranches that we work with, the co-managed ranches and the reference ranches. So up in the top, we have the co-managed ranches. And you can see densities for the first 2 species, loggerhead shrike and horned lark, are not a whole lot different between the 2 types of ranches. But for the Sprague's pipit, we see that densities are a little bit higher on the reference ranches. But the good news is that they do seem to be increasing on the co-managed ranches as well. Much lower density in general than some of the other species like horned lark. I'll show you a few more of these. Oh, and just to throw in there, so we can also estimate across all the ranches what how many birds this network is supporting. So we estimated in 2020 that the SGN ranches were supporting around 11,600 Sprague's pipits. A few other species here. Again, we have the co-managed ranches at top and the reference ranches below. Here we see a few more differences. Chestnut-collared longspur, sometimes higher on the reference ranches, but not always. And surprisingly, this last year, which was a very dry year in 2019 and 2020, we had higher densities on our co-managed ranches than on the reference ranches. We tend to see the opposite pattern for some of the species that require more tall grass conditions, like the grasshopper sparrow. But again, not a real clear pattern yet. And that's one thing we have to be a little cautious with, is not being overly concerned too fast when we see what appears to be a trend. We need to sort of understand these better before we raise any alarms with our landowner partners. Again, a similar kind of pattern with the lark bunting in that we're actually seeing higher population densities on the co-managed ranches during these drought years than on the reference ranches.
So we're going to have to wrap up here pretty soon because the meeting needs the Zoom line for the plenary. So I don't know if you have just one last word or point. We only have about, well, they're giving us 9 minutes now, but I don't know if there's a point you want to make or some more photos, and then we can maybe have some questions.
That's great. Yeah, I'm just about wrapped up here.
Great.
I can wrap up in about 2 minutes if that's all right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, a couple more examples with a few other species. Again, some of the tall grass species like Baird sparrow, not doing so great during the drought, but we do have the data at least to be able to analyze what's going on. So just to wrap up here, talk about sort of where we're heading. So this program, we hope to continue growing slowly and strategically, enhancing around 20 to 40,000 acres a year, restoring around 100 to 500 acres per year. We'll be installing these signs at the entry gates to each of these ranches in the coming year. I already mentioned the expanded monitoring. We'll also be conducting some surveys of our ranchers to better understand their motivations and perspectives on this collaboration and how things are going. And we'll be using those monitoring results to begin that adaptive management feedback. We also plan to host a meeting soon in Chihuahua. We'd hope to do that this year, but with the ongoing pandemic, it might not be possible. But this Encuentro Ganadero is intended to bring together the ranchers and conservationists, not just from our networks, but from other networks as well in the desert, to create a better sense of community and more opportunities for collaboration. I just want to recognize our partners. This work wouldn't be possible without the support of many organizations from Canada to Mexico, foundations and agencies, and in particular, the Neotropical Migratory Bird Conservation Act in the United States, which funds much of this work. And if there's time, I'd love to take any questions.
There is time. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to see you mentioning the Sprague's pipit and chestnut colored long spurs. Those are the ones that we're interested in up here on the Canadian border. And we're always excited to see those in our breeding bird survey routes. So it's really fun for me to see this stuff being done on both ends of the ranges. We do have a question in the Q&A box right now, and just asking which species of shrubs are you removing when you're doing your brush control?
Yeah, primarily mesquite. That's the main invader. And as I mentioned, we really try to target these to areas that are showing encroachment, not areas where mesquite would naturally dominate the landscape.
And what about fire? Is prescribed burning on the horizon of folks that are managing down there? You've really only shown a lot of mechanical stuff.
Yeah, it's I think still a big challenge culturally to get that practice accepted. Yeah, as you can imagine, it's like burning up your forage, right? So, and in the desert, you never know when it's going to rain next. So I think there's still a lot to be done in that area, but fire is needed and could be an effective tool, I think.
And how do they perceive chemical treatments? Is that kind of culturally, kind of faux pas or? Yeah,
we've gotten very little interest in applying any sort of chemicals. Most ranchers that we work with do not want any kind of chemicals applied on the land.
So when you compare the climate change impacts that you've seen in Mexico versus further north, say up to Colorado or elsewhere in the Rockies, do you have a sense of where the magnitude has been greatest or how the variation has played out?
Well, the Chihuahuan Desert is obviously a drier region. So the climate change impacts can seem even more severe when we're in a prolonged drought, like 3 years going on right now in northern Mexico. The other, I think, effect of climate change we maybe don't see immediately is the shrub encroachment, because that happens over time, but is also related to, you know, how carbon is the carbon cycle basically, and how it's taken up and released.
So I think maybe the last question before we wrap up, but how have landowners come to you? Is it through, do they approach you and ask, have they been recruited? Is it sort of taking off on its own now that you have kind of that core group of adopters? Can you speculate on how we can get these things spun out into broader landscapes?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was us going to individual ranchers, and we still do that quite a bit, kind of identify specific ranches and ranchers we want to work with. But we've also gotten people coming to us asking how they can get involved and seeing what's going on their neighbors' land. So there's some of that contagious conservation and word of mouth communication that happens. And so now we have sort of going in both ways, and we're actually having to sort of be a little careful with not overcommitting ourselves with our limited staff. We only have a staff of about 4 people working full time to attend to these 28 ranches, which are spread out across a pretty big area.
Mm-hmm. How did you arrive at 15 years as your time frame? Did that come from you guys, from them, kind of a compromise?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's sort of a compromise, something that you know, doesn't seem too far out, but it was designed primarily from the standpoint of the types of infrastructure that we're installing on ranches and the useful life of that infrastructure to make sure that you know, we're protecting our investments, essentially.
That's a good point. Arvind, thanks a lot for this. We have to wrap up. We have to close because we're going to go to a plenary session now on the climate change impacts and how we're dealing with it in rangeland. So it's a great segue. Great photos, testing data. Thanks a lot. You're on the web, right? Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. There's an international page there, so everybody should go chase them down. Thanks a lot, Arvind.
Thank you, Devin, and thanks everyone for tuning in today.